outside, so we got some background noise. We've got a lot to cover, so we're gonna get started. So I'll just welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the third episode of CLxLive Live. We have some amazing folks on the call with us. Before we do that, I will just tell you a little bit about CLxLive and manage some technical things that are happening. CLxLive is a North American nonprofit built to advance and advocate for company culture as a strategic advantage in business. It's for culture builders who are interested in coming together and understanding more about company culture and finding camaraderie and communities that are doing the same thing and passionate about what they do. We have labs in 6 cities across the country, 3 in America, 3 in the U.S., 3 in Canada, actually. Denver, New York, San Francisco, Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto. If you are not in one of those cities and are interested in starting a lab in your city, you can go to our website, CLxLiveX.com, and click on cities and start a lab. And you can, there's a whole FAQ there for you. All right, so I put everything on record, so everybody should be either, if you're not Kat or Andrew, please make sure that your audio is muted and your video is also off. And everybody's on gallery mode. My name is Josh Levine. I'm co-founder of CLxLive X, amongst other responsibilities, and I'm going to facilitate this conversation on scaling company culture. So on the phone with us today, we have Kat Steinmetz from Stitch Fix and Andrew Chow from Boba Guys, and they have both have been part of organizations that have gone through some scaling, and I hope that they can share with us a little bit more about what they've gone through, how they've sort of confronted some of the challenges that they've faced, and maybe give us all some advice on what to do when we're thinking of, or how to identify some of the challenges perhaps that come with scaling company culture. So with that, maybe I will hand it off. I will definitely hand it off to you guys to introduce yourselves. Kat, maybe I'll go to you first. Maybe just a quick intro, and then we'll kind of get into your expertise as we kind of have these conversations going forward.
Sure. All right, great. Hey, everybody. I'm Kat Steinmetz, and I work with Stitch Fix. I'm the Director of Learning and Development here, and I lead that team across the company. And I've been here almost 3 years, coming up on that pretty soon. And before that, I was the head of HR at Burning Man, the events and the nonprofit Burning Man Project. And I was there for 10 years, along with doing work with startups along those times. I'm also a musician and a creative person, so I do that as on the side and have done that more professionally in the past as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kat. Andrew, please.
Hey,
tell everybody about yourself.
Yeah, awesome. Actually, Kat and I had a lot of my former colleagues. I started my career in Walmart, so I know there's a lot of ex-Walmart people at Stitch Fix. So I founded a company called Boba Guys. So if you don't know, Boba Guys is more of a cafe concept, or it is a cafe concept here in San Francisco, which is where I am now, and New York, and soon to be LA. So I'll be talking a lot about culture and operating culture remotely, which is really hard to do, I found. And prior to that, I was a brand manager at Clorox and at Leapfrog. So I spent a lot of my time in corporate America. So I kind of took what I learned from there and put it into my own company. And now right now our company is about 190 people, with about 20 people in corporate and then about 160 that are essentially in the stores.
Fantastic. Awesome. So I think, for me, the question that I got a lot, or I have gotten a lot over my time has been, how do you scale culture? And what that first thing to me means, people realize that it's a problem. And I think that that's kind of an interesting place to start. Andrew, do you want to sort of, are there any moments where you feel like you were like, oh man, this is like, we are not scaling well, or this is like a symptom of not having scaled well. And it was just sort of that moment of realization for you.
Yeah, I think for me, because I'm compared to Stitch Fix, my company is still very up and coming, so it's a little more messy. So it happens all the time where, like, one of the big things that I aspire to is like Danny Meyer. In my business, hospitality is huge. Danny Meyer from Union Square Hospitality, Shake Shack, if you don't know, he's one of the kind of the pioneers of hospitality. And sometimes I run into it where my team isn't always so hospitable. So I run into issues where I'm like, wow, I thought we trained you better. And so I think a lot about training, a lot about the culture of servant leadership and having those operate as our dominant culture. And it's hard. It's like in high school. How do you create like a dominant school spirit when you have 1,000, 2,000 people? When you have a homeroom of 30 people, it's pretty easy. You get one person in charge. When you have 200 people, which is like a freshman class, it's a lot harder. Not every freshman, not every senior is like, I remember back in the day, it's been a really long time, but how hard it was getting people involved. And I think I have very, very similar problems within Boba Guys where, especially when they're across different states and time zones, not everyone's gonna buy into it the same. So I think a lot about times where just our service has been broken. And I'm like, I wonder where in training did we fail? And I think that's my responsibility to lead that.
Kat, does it sound familiar? Is this a similar? Is there something similar or anything that is significantly different? I think we can learn from both of those.
Yes. It is interesting that it does often come back to training or learning, right? Or where we help somebody develop or learn something even at the very beginning. I think that's definitely, or, another interesting thing that we face here too, just made me think of that, is sort of the unlearning. Like, I think people need to do a lot of unlearning from where they come from. And it doesn't mean they forget everything, right? Because obviously we hired them for a reason. They have great experience, or we think they're bringing that with them. But what I find often for people that don't, make it or don't do very well or struggle, or where we have challenges, is where they're not able to let go of the way that they did things in the past. And they really, really are stuck to that and invested in that. And they're not able to sort of be adaptable and flexible and curious, right? I think a lot of it is like, can you remain curious? Can you be open to new ways? And I think that's where the rub often comes. So that's an interesting thing, because when we're onboarding people, do we think about that enough, right? Are there ways that we can help people to unlearn the things or adapt what they have learned to what the new thing is that they're in now, right? In a way that makes them able to like move forward well and collaborate and build relationships and build trust and yet still bring all this great experience that they have with them. So I think that that's something that we I feel like is a sort of a consistent conversation that we have in our people and culture team. And when I was at Burning Man too, I think that people, again, that can sort of play a larger role than we might think.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to try to get you guys to have a conversation with one another, and I'm going to try to do my best to stop moderating, because I think it's more interesting. I have so many questions, so I'm going to zip my lip. Kat, do you have any
I saw you
questions
shaking your head, Andrew. What did you think?
Well, no, I was going to ask, what advice do you have for me? Because my team, they're so young. I don't know if they have anything to unlearn other than maybe life habits. Like, how do you build something from ground up? What would you say?
Right. I mean, I definitely think that, having done a lot of that at Burning Man, having been there at 10 years and really seen it go from a very small, not only a few people sort of knew about, to a global phenomenon, was quite a journey. And so it was the sort of like, who are you? And that sounds kind of weird and I don't know, or like, I'm super into it. So yes, I want to be there. It used to be sort of one or the other. And then it got to like, wow, I just want to be there because I know what I've seen, or I know how it was experienced for me. And now I just have stars in my eyes and I want to be there because it's Burning Man, right? So we used to have a lot of trouble with that, right? And that would be young people too, right? Really coming fresh off of like, wow, it must be like that the job is going to be just what I see out front, right? And that could happen with your brand, I bet, right? I see this brand, like it's this cool thing, will line up for that place. It must be so cool. I see that. And so like, it's just going to be cool all the time, right?
But food is super dirty work. A lot of dirty work in food though. Yeah, you're right.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing too, of like, as you shift and get more known, right? Like, how do you shift people out of it's just this like cool thing or this starry-eyed thing or whatever? And it's like, yes, it's a job, but it's a job you should love, right? And you should still love it no matter where you're doing this job, right? And so you're going to have a great time here because of X. But I think when, you know, really strategically, when I came here, we're only 3 years old when I got here. We really said, you know, let's build all the foundational things that we really think that we're going to use to design everything off. And so we really went into designing, you know, they had just done the values that really shows what are our leadership qualities here, what are the values and how do they show up, what are the like things underneath that looks like, and like what are the ways that we hire people and what are the, you know, qualities of that, and made that into our OS, our cultural OS. And we designed principles off that for a lot of different areas, for our managers, for, you know, recruiting, for compensation, for how we develop people. And so I feel like that is the thing that has really helped us stick as we've grown immensely in the 3 years I've been here, to always go back to that thing, and without it being like it's so rigid, right? Because I think that's a problem too if we become too rigid. But we interview people from other companies that have been around for a long time, and they come in to interview for a position, they'll often say, wow, we don't even have those things. And that's where like we have a lot of problems, because nobody knows what to go back to say like, this is what we stand for and this is actually how we think. So I feel like that was really helpful, because we don't have everything. We're still only 6 years old. We have a lot of things to build still, but we have this foundation that we design everything off, and we connect the thread and the dots through everything we do using those elements. What do you think, Andrew? What has it been for you?
I agree. I think one of the questions I remember when we were talking, and I think a lot of people who's watching, they may relate. If you're starting a company, it's like when you're creating a company from scratch, you have a culture that you want, but you also have the ultimate tangible product of the culture, I think. So for us, it was like, what's the vision of the company? So for us, the companies that I kind of model ourselves after are In-N-Out, which is like a burger chain out here in Bay Area, California, and In-N-Out, and a sports team, actually the San Antonio Spurs. I'm just a sports fan. And I think about how does like the Spurs, I'm not even from Texas, but how does the San Antonio Spurs, how are they constantly high performing? So it's really hard because you're always having a juxtaposition of culture and performance. So how do you codify that? So I start with what are values, team spirit, value over replacement player, like plus minus in sports. So I think about cultures and principles. So I take the vision, I make that into principles. I take the principles, I put it into habits, and I put the habits into codified like things that I write down, and rules and guidelines. So I take that into everything I do. So Boba Guys was, you know, our vision is to bridge cultures. How we do that is quality, transparency, and giving a damn. So transparency, let's just take one of the principles out. How does transparency look? So the way I design my stores, the way we talk about dirty laundry in the company, the way we think about who got promoted, why did they get promoted? We actually do that in front of everybody. Even when I interact with the public, we have a pretty strong Instagram and Snapchat following. I'm very transparent with like, well, why do we do it this way instead of this way, even with the customers that we have out there. So that's one way we codify it. So we take the vision into the principles, into the habits, and then into a codified, tangible culture.
Yeah. What was I'm just so curious, how did you decide to start this company, Andrew?
A cultural thing.
And all the rest of it. Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna do this without kind of saying it was because of our former employers. But I would say a lot of what I wanted to do was build a culture company. It could have been, I always tell people it could have been any company. Actually, that's what you say about culture companies in general. They could have done anything. They just happened to do apparel. For Stitch Fix, you guys happen to do, and you guys just announced your IPO. Congrats on that. I read that. I was like, oh, great. So I think like high performing cultures, we wanted high performing culture. We know we wanted high culture, but at what point and where do we get with like what product? And our product was more of an ethnic product originally, which is something that primarily Asian or young people drink. And we made it, most people say we're the next Phil's Coffee. So if we're the next Phil's Coffee, how do we how do we get to that point? I think a lot of it had to do with getting the right messaging out there, getting our team to be always educated and to treat people as if they were tourists into our culture. That was another thing where we have to explain what tapioca, if you don't know what tapioca is, it's like these tiny balls and stuff that made out of cassava plants. That explanation takes a lot more time. You're not just walking into a coffee shop. So we have to train our employees to be almost like a cultural ambassador, because sometimes if you're not Asian, you're Latino or Latina, and you're explaining an Asian product, it could be daunting for certain people. So we have to have a very immersive way of training, which we do. We do a lot of, tonight is a multicultural night at Boba Guys. So we're doing a bonfire where everybody's bringing different cuisine at the bonfire and sharing it. So again, that was why we wanted to do all of that, which was hard to do when I was at Walmart or Clorox.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like what you said too about we could do anything, because that made me think when we created our OS, we were like, oh wow, the client isn't here. Is that weird that the client isn't named in here? We're like, actually no, because we can take this and do absolutely anything. And our chief algorithms officer, who helped sort of just think through, he was like, if we wanted to solve world hunger, this is how we would do it. We would do it with these qualities and these behaviors and this way of having people come on with us to do it, right? So it wouldn't matter what we were doing.
Can I ask let me ask you, how would, because you came in then to an existing algorithm, an existing culture, what did you to kind of expand that? Or, I mean, you probably didn't change it up a lot, but what did you do to take it to the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, when I had joined, they had just the values for a few months. We didn't have anything about what our leadership qualities were, and we hadn't quite refined how we hire people. And so we hadn't put that together into an OS and sort of said what that is. So that's exactly the work. Literally my first week, that was the first thing I jumped into, was doing focus groups around what does leadership look like here and how does it show up and what are the qualities. And again, sort of a marker of the culture is we didn't say oh, let's do this in a vacuum or let's do this in a silo and then put it out and have everybody get trained and adapt to it. It was let's go out and talk to everybody. Let's find out what it actually is, extract those things, go back to the people that we, went to focus groups and said, is this what it is? And, tweaked a little, but for the most part, people are like, yeah, this is it, because they all said it, right? So it was we took that and just put it into a framework. So like you were saying, sort of how we behave and you kind of codify, it was a similar type idea. So we have basically our standard, the standard of how we hire somebody, which is bright, kind, and goal-oriented. And those 3 words show up in every single job description that we write and everywhere that we talk about it. That's who we hire
Can you
here.
say that again?
Bright, kind, and goal-oriented. So those are the 3 qualities we look for, and that's the standard. You have to have that to get in the door. Then the next is our values, which is our practice. It's our daily practice of how we behave with each other. So it reminded me, Andrew, what you just said, how we behave, how we act, right? And that is responsibility, partnership, innovation, and integrity. And those show up in everything we do. So that's just the daily practice. Then we said, well, how are we building our future? So the future are these leadership qualities, and that's how we actually are going to build everything out as we continue to go. And so our leadership qualities are trust, act, inspire, develop, and learn. And so those 12 words basically kind of go through how, you were saying, sort of the steps. Here's what you have to have as a standard again. Here's how you practice and behave with each other every day. Here's how you start building yourself and your leadership, the future of how this company is going to show up. And as you can see, and underneath all that is feedback. So feedback is the heart of everything because it's how our stylists understand more, it's how the data algorithms understand, and it's how we as people actually know more about ourselves and know more about each other and how we grow, right? So that's how we do everything, is that OS.
I have
Yeah,
a
it was
question
quite
for,
a to go through that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that was great. I have a question, Andrew. I've observed that most companies don't start out with the foresight of, hey, we want to be a culture company. Did you have that experience? I mean, I think you started being we've got a vision, we've got values, we've got these pieces and parts. I mean, did you, have you experienced where it's there was this moment of you started within a previous organization maybe where it wasn't, and then they went, oh my gosh, we're growing, we need something to keep us on track. Like, it's not like it used to be, right? They don't have the language to say culture isn't scaling. It's like, it's not like it used to be. People are whatever, being assholes or whatever it is. Is that something, I mean, did you have that experience, or were you, have you always been lucky enough to be in an incredibly culture-centric organization?
That's a great question. I definitely was a little lucky. Clorox and Walmart were really strong, and Timbuktu, which is where I also was at, very strong. I will say though, it's this book I'm going to show you guys. I got some props. So this is Let My People Go Surfing. It's by Javon Chenard, the Patagonia founder. And that book almost changed my life. I was at Timbuktu, and it wasn't like I wanted to not be like the companies I was at, but this book convinced me that I wanted a company with a soul. So the question was, what does a company with a soul look like? So ultimately, a company with a soul to me felt like it was organic, it was real, it was authentic. And so it wasn't like a robot, which I would say the one thing about being a part of Clorox and Walmart and really big companies, for the most part, they were more of like machine driven. And so I just wanted to build a company that was not like that. And so it was, for me, building a company with a soul, which then ultimately led to a culture driven company. But it was this book that changed kind of my perspective on everything.
Nice.
All right, so companies with a soul. And Kat, when previously Burning Man, I mean, that's obviously a community organization. Was there always something from the beginning, or was there a moment of like, oh, we got to codify this. Something's happening here?
Yeah, they definitely had a moment in time where, Larry Harvey, the original founder for Burning Man, put together the principles. So it's interesting, we're saying a lot about principles, because I feel like we always say in Stitch Fix, and certainly at Burning Man, they're a principle-based organization, not a rule-based organization. And again, some people know how to adapt to that and some don't. But Burning Man most certainly that way. They're actually very anti-rule. That's why most people are there. And, the beginning of that was very different from a lot of ways that companies begin, right? So the way Stitch Fix began was, Kat Lake had this idea and she wanted to make it a company, right? Pretty typical. Andrew had an idea, he wanted to make a culture company, but he had this like P in this product, right? So Burning Man was so not that, right? Like it was just a bunch of people that sort of continued to gather, and it sort of became something, and it needed some organization. So that is a very different thing from most things as far as how they start. And so that made it challenging, right? Because it's not like you could go back and say, well, this is our product, or this is when people would be very like, oh no, it's not, we're not about that. So we're building community, we're not trying to make money, hence why we became a nonprofit, because it was so much led itself to that. But I definitely think I think that's a part of sort of how are you building from that, right? Like where are you coming from? What's the original purpose? Right. And I think like Andrew was saying, like, is it, also because no matter what you are going to do, you want to have a great culture and that's what you want to be in, or is it about something else? Like where are you starting from, and what's your long vision for how you want to build the culture, even if you're tiny?
I see a couple questions. Do we want to answer Corey and P. Kuntumu's question? You want to divide and conquer? I can try. I get to get a stab at the first one because, actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is Stitch Fix pretty remote? Do you have a remote workforce? They're pretty scattered.
Well, interestingly enough, we do in that way because we have 4 warehouses, which all are all over the country. And they have a large number of employees at all of those warehouses, and they have pretty, unique cultures within those. And at the same time, obviously, they're part of the company. And then we have 3,500 remote stylists all over the country that work part-time out of their home. So yes.
Oh, that's true. I forgot all your stylists, of course. Well, then do you want to both answer what's engaging employees not at the headquarters? Mine is pretty.
Yeah, well,
okay, you go.
Do it. Yeah.
No,
that's cool. Good.
This is gonna be real quick. My quick tip is I use Slack a lot. So I'm trying to show you guys my Slack app. I highly recommend Slack. It's super San Francisco, but some things that we do in culture though is the bigger point is have a common point of communication. If it's an email-centric culture, make it about emails. We use Slack. And with Slack, there's a lot of emojis. There's a lot of like zany things that you could do on Slack. And for us, it allows people to get the communication across and to interact, infuse culture because we put emojis on a lot of these messages, or we say good job, and we have a lot of memes that we put, like meme photos on the Slack bulletin boards, which you could see. And it allows us to talk and give culture despite being across the country.
Kat, do you guys have a single point of contact?
I think communication is kind of what it always comes down to, right? It's like, how are you communicating? Are you making that simple and easy entry for people? Are you making it consistent so people kind of know the culture right away when they get in there? And you know, what are the channels? And I think that also, so yes, we use a number of things. We definitely use Slack. We have a different system that we use for our styling community. And so they're all in a big community. I think it's Yammer. And so they use that because it's got a huge knowledge base in there as well, and other things that they can use to plug into. We're actually just about to launch our intranet, so we'll be all on that now too, as well as like Slack. I think Yammer will go away because now we'll have the intranet. So I think definitely tools is a huge part of it, right? And like how you can actually express yourself in that tool, I think is huge, right? It's like you want to make it something where you're able to do that. I think every culture has their little things that they have. We're big on GIFs here. We really love them.
GIFs?
So
like physical GIFs?
Like little memes or boomerang GIFs or whatever. Like,
cool.
Love to use them and everything. So people are into that here, and they go in all kinds of emails that go out to the company from all kinds of people. And I think it's also really open to me. Like, it's not a place where like I shouldn't be the one to send something out, or it has to go by a certain person. It's very open that people can send an email out and, you know, announce somebody new coming, or, you know, whatever it is. So I think that people are used to seeing all kinds of people and different levels of people, whatever, you know, coming out with communication. So I think that's also dependent on the culture, but I think that helps as well. And that there's a real focus around each area. Like with styling, they have a whole focus of a group that works on communication, right? It's like, so how can we make sure that that group feels like they're as connected as possible, considering all of them are remote at all times. They rarely actually meet each other. So it's, you know, also tools like making things like Zoom or Blue Jeans or whatever the systems are that you use. Like, I think those are important, because if people are having trouble at that level, how are they going to actually connect with one another? So I think, like you're saying, Andrew, I think the tools make a difference, but it's also the intention, right? So like, is it an open? Do people have abilities to, you know, connect with one another? Is that accepted? You know, building all of that. I think also we're really big on making sure like feedback happens from a person to a person. We use we have a twice a year process we call collect and reflect, where you collect feedback and then you reflect on that and you write your own sort of development plan. It's very self-driven. It's not an HR system, right, that you log into or it's anonymous. It's actual person-to-person live conversation that you get all of that feedback from. So again, we're always making sure that there's a good like storytelling, word to, you know, mouth to mouth, and that somebody sees somebody and that it's not third person. So I think that's another way to do that.
So thank you, Kat. And I'll just sort of interject here. And I really like that you guys went right to this idea of communication and facilitating communication, and which to me means relationships. And that's what I've observed, is that as organizations grow, there's a certain breaking point where people don't have relationships as easily. They can't hold these relationships easily. So we need these tools and structures that enable that to continue to happen. And I think that's the same thing with the remote workers. There's a great article in Harvard Business Review that just came out around how IBM is asking people to come back into the office and not being remote workers. And they're sort of talking about why that is all of a sudden. And I don't think that you have to be, but I do think you have to be very conscious of that.
Yeah.
The reason why that they're doing that, and the punchline is that you can, when you have the open communication, high bandwidth of being person to person, there's so much more conveyed. So how do you actually create that relationship and understand what's happening back and forth? Let's see. So one question more. Yeah, Andrew.
Quick, I want to add, like, here's another prop. There's a thing that we have called table topics. I'm not plugging products, but I'm just
yeah, sure.
It's to talk about what you just said, Josh, real quick, about meaningful conversations. it's so hard, especially nowadays, to have dialogue and meaningful conversations, even when you're in the physical space. We still have a headquarters. We still have 20 of us with all the managers. When we have meaningful conversations, we use things like these, which ask these like very hard tabletop questions, like tell me what makes you cry. And so we have these out in our office on our main communal table, and people use it all the time. And so it kind of uses that high bandwidth that you have when you're in person. But people always ask, well, how did you get so deep with your team? And it's because we have like tools like this to force those conversations, because otherwise it really isn't natural sometimes. And you don't want to be like that. I don't want to be the founder that keeps on like probing people to be like, tell me your life story, you know. But how do you do it? And so certain tools let that happen, and it shows how people, it might explain why somebody works a certain way. Oh, well, it's because their family upbringing and didn't really have, they're the only child, which explains why they can't share. I don't know. Sorry, only children. But that's kind of like, it helps explain stories like that.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because we just used those cards, the table topics things, at our styling and client experience offsite, and we had that at all. I recognize that. They're so good. And I have like 6 question books that are very similar from my past of just doing all these kinds of offsites and stuff, because I think they're just so valuable. And I think like one of the undercurrents that I heard you say, Andrew, that I feel like is also not been said, but like shows up here so much, is intention. Like, you are intentional, right? You want to bring these things in your culture. So the way you talk, the way you show up, the tone of voice, your body language, how you are, all of those things show up in that. So it's like, have you fully internalized what it is you're trying to have intention around, right? So I think that's the thing that is the undercurrent here of like, you know, even when, you know, our mission is to inspire people to be their best selves. And we want people to actually show up as a whole person. And that means we actually have to do that too. So, you know, our CEO shows up as a whole person in every all hands meeting. And she talks about what's hard, and she talks about, you know, she had a baby last year, and she talks about being a mom, and she talks about taking off the 4 months as being a mom. Like, she's very open, she's very a real person and very authentic. And so that sets the pace, right? Like, obviously she's the top of that, but every manager in her management team that she, you know, hired all shows up that way too. They just show up as real, authentic people, and people take their cue from that, right? So if you're a new person, you say, okay, it's okay for me to show up as a real person.
That's amazing. I love, I mean, I think it's about, I think it all goes back to those relationships and being able to understand who these people are. And if we go back to this topic of scaling, how do you have these authentic relationships with all these people? You know, a scale of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and maybe part of the answer, Kat, is this authenticity where it's like everybody just, there's no hiding behind something where it's like, oh, you don't really know who I am. It's, you get to be authentic and are responsible for that. But I don't know, maybe Andrew, I mean, is that, how do you have relationships, deep relationships with like 2,000, you know, if you have a 5,000 business organization, or what does that scaling that kind of intensity look like?
I might have a cop-out answer. I don't know. I'm looking at Blue Bottle, who just sold to Nestle. I'm looking at like Phil's. I'm looking at Starbucks. I don't know how they do it. I will say.
Do they do it?
I mean, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's a problem. And maybe it's just hard. I will say one thing that I try though is having access to me, which is why I'm pretty accessible. Maybe scaling how to communicate. So I'm very efficient with my messaging, which makes it sometimes where people are like, oh, Andrew sends really short emails, but I get back to people so fast they understand why. At least I'm getting back to them.
Yeah.
All right. So access to leadership, right? So connecting.
Going
like
with her transparency. It's like with the transparency thing that and the authenticity that Kat was just talking about. That's the only way. I think that I'm actually, maybe that's why I'm on this webinar too. I'm trying to learn from Kat. I think that might be the only thing that could truly scale as you grow, authenticity. I think that is a truth that she said, and I think that's something I buy into for sure.
Yeah.
I do too.
And I think it's also, like we said, it's the intention, right? It's obviously the undercurrent, but it's also just saying it. Like, this is actually what we believe in. We expect that you're going to meet with someone and talk to them like a real person. And that means when I meet with you, I'm going to talk to you like a real person. So it's not only that we model that, right? Like you have to actually model that for people to like believe it, but you have to state it too. Like this is actually important. We give time for this, right? We expect that you do a one-on-one with your person every week, and we expect to see it on your calendar, and we give time for it, and we don't make you feel bad for taking the time to go do training for yourself, right? We expect that you would go to these trainings because we made them for a reason, and they're there for you to engage in. And I can tell you that we do that with new people that come, where maybe they come from a place where that wasn't very expected, or they came from a place where L&D kind of was really lame, and they don't want to go to the class, right? Because it's like, ugh. And so, you know, we make sure we make time for it, and we make really awesome content. Like we make sure it's really, really good, and that people love it. And when they don't, we actually make changes to it and we make it better. So I think like all of those things make statements, right? They all say what you stand for, and they all say more than even your words sometimes, right? So if your manager's making time, if they're going to that, if they're teaching that, right, they're facilitating and they're taking part in it, all of those things speak a lot of words to people that aren't necessarily words, but I think also stating it simply is really helpful for people.
Yeah, I might add, I'm reading the question that Morgan just asked about how do you have those initial conversations. One topic that I love, and I've been reading a lot about this, is radical candor. Sheryl Sandberg made this really popular. Sheryl, I mean, I've been on the recipient end of this because we've done projects with her, and radical candor is how I would start that conversation, because it's letting them know, hey, here's the truth. So you actually don't waste, it's more efficient. You don't waste a lot of time. But I'm also letting you know I care about you as a person and I want to see you develop, but I'm giving you the hard truth. And I think there's a book I have, I don't want to keep on bringing my books up, is 1 Minute Manager. In 1 Minute Manager, one of the most famous books also is about 1 minute praisings, 1 minute reprimands, 1 minute kind of evaluations. So I think radical candor is by far, I think, how I personally start everything. I don't have a lot of time. I'm going to invest in you, but you also got to pull your weight. And I tell them when they don't pull their weight.
I love that you brought up radical candor. We are huge fans. So many of us in the people and culture team and many other teams, our styling team, have read, yes, that one too, Radical Candor. We went to Kim Malone's book launch that she had, and actually one of her facilitators is speaking at an offsite for our management team tomorrow. So we're super into
Oh man, I'm jealous.
So I love that you I know, I want to be there too, because I'm not going to be there. I helped set it all up, and I was like, oh. But love that. It so connects to how we think about what we do here. And I think it's so, even what you said too about, I'm going to tell you the hard stuff, that's actually like when we say we hire bright, kind, and goal-oriented, we use kind and not nice. And we did it for that reason. Kind means you do the hard stuff and not necessarily the easy stuff, but it's the right stuff, right? You actually tell somebody what they need to know so that they can actually grow, and that's a gift to them. But it's hard and it's challenging, but it means you need to do it because it's a kind thing to do, actually.
Vice is asking a question about transitioning. And so it's, I think that question is, how do you think about when there's a specific shift in an organizational strategy, business strategy, and then also cultural strategy, right? Like how often do you renew? I mean, what is the trigger for that? And then how does that happen? I think that's a really insightful question, because it's not always like, it's going to be the same, just bigger, right?
Trying to catch, like, tell me again sort of the essence of that. I want to make sure I caught like what was the essence of that question.
So the question specifically is, how do you maintain significance or relevance as a company that's transitioning in addition to growing, right? So just changing, updating culture, right? There's this shift.
Okay, got it. Yeah. How do you keep fresh, right? How do you not stay rigid in these things that you've identified are great? Huge, right? Because we've seen so many companies go down from that. Like they had an amazing culture 10 years ago, but now it totally doesn't work. Or those things aren't now refreshed. So I think, again, it's like, how do you work that into the everyday? How do you not make that a huge thing that you do 10 years later? Because that is not a good way to go, right? So I think it's got to be a part of sort of the everyday conversation that you're allowed to speak your mind. Say something when you see something. You're allowed to say, wow, I don't really see that showing up right now. Let's look at that and be curious about it. You know, those things, again, are the starts, right? That's the undercurrent. Do the management team and the leaders actually say when things aren't going well? Are they able to say that? Do they talk about it? And then are they able to actually make changes from that? I think that's also part of the undercurrent. Then, you know, it's like building on that. Do you have a culture where experimentation is okay, where testing is okay, where focus groups are fine, where piloting is fine? That is very accepted here, so everyone's on board with that. They know that, like, oh, sure, I want to go to a pilot, or yeah, I want to come to the focus group because that's how we do things here, and it actually makes a difference. Like, what I have to say goes into something that actually makes change. And again, like, are you actually opening to change these things that are so a part of who you are? I think there's always just got to be room for questions and curiosity.
Yeah, the one thing I'll quickly add is whether or not your goal is to refresh in or to pivot entirely. I think about sports, as I was saying, as one of my big analogies, is that when you change a culture of a sports team, sometimes you just change out the coach. So I do think that it is a hard question. It's almost related to Morgan Sutherland's just question right now is like, if somebody doesn't buy into it, what do you do? I'm almost zero tolerance. Fortunately, I've never hired somebody that hasn't because I've been doing all the hiring and my co-founder is also doing all the hiring. But I think one day we're going to get to it, but I'm pretty zero tolerance about people who don't buy into culture. And if you know you need to change, even when I was at a big company, I was very quick to kind of like make sure they got aligned or not. And I've been a follower of radical candor, whether it was called that or not, for probably a better part of a decade. So I would say, and if it is kind of more of just a refresh, it's almost like growing up. Like if it's your soul, is it still core to who you are as a being? There are certain things you do as a teenager or as an adult that's you don't do as a toddler. So if you're upfront with your team about what you're doing now, and you're like, I have to have processes now. I know it wasn't like that when we were young, but we have to do it for this reason. And you bring people along, and you're saying, hey, this is still part of our value of servant leadership. It just looks different because it's bigger now. And the way servant leadership looks when you're 440 people is different from 400. That's what you need to articulate to them. And we owe it as leaders to the team.
So two things. Two things that I want to say. One is in all the work that we've done, regardless of if it actually is a complete shift or a refresh, no one ever calls it a new values. Everybody always wants a values refresh. It's always a refresh. Yeah. I don't know what that means. I'm grappling with that.
You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater or something.
I don't know. I'm not sure what that means. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and maybe Kat, I'll throw this to you, which is I read Morgan's question from a sort of a worker talent point of view, which is, what if my leader, right? What if my leader doesn't buy in? What do I do?
Right. And I think this will play into that. But like I was saying, plus one on Andrew's thing, especially about the zero tolerance, I'm super agree on that. And I think, again, it's like, how does that actually show up day to day, right? How are you actually modeling that and having that show up be a part of how you do business? And, you know, I think here we really at Stitch Fix really decided that part of our metrics and how we say how we're doing or how someone is doing too, but not only the company, but how someone is doing, is that it's not only the what you're doing, it's the how you're doing it. And so we really feel like both things are as important. So when we say someone's performance is X, that includes how they're performing their stuff, right? That means like, how are they going about it? Are they being kind? Are they being, are they building trust? Are they, do they have responsibility for themselves? These different values that show up on our OS. So that's actually a part of it. And so we have a very zero tolerance too. And we have exited people that are in very high positions here because they are not on board, right? And so, we use, speaking of tools, we use a tool called Tiny Pulse, which we use every 2 weeks to do one question out. So we don't do a big survey at the end of the year. We don't find that very helpful. So, and we pulse and we report out on that. Every all hands meeting, myself and our chief people officer reports out on what the actual results were. What are the scores? What are people saying? Real quotes, so that we hold ourselves accountable. And we say like, wow, this isn't going well. If we see things showing up about a certain person or we're hearing that, we actually do something about it. Like you were saying, Andrew, I don't allow that to just continue to be toxic or permeate my culture, because it will. You're speaking volumes by doing nothing about that.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
There's an interesting, I've gotten this question as well. Like, well, what if my leader isn't, what if they don't get it? And so I think there's two ways to handle it. One is you can start to influence the culture of your sphere of influence, even if it's not at the top, right? Be the change you want to see in your culture. Or the other is, if it's not working, it's not working, right? And you maybe find a better organization, right? Got to go to Patagonia. Got to go. I hear Boba Guys is hiring, so maybe
yeah,
you check
we
in
need
with
some
them.
good culture people. That's true.
We're hiring.
Yeah, Stitch Fix is hiring too. So those are I think to kind of get it at that level. I hear it. I hear that a lot, and people are just frustrated, and it's hard.
Yeah, I think it's very true. Like sometimes you think you joined the place and it isn't what it is. I think you, like you said, Josh, you really have to ask yourself, have you done the work yourself? Have you actually done the work you need to do? Are you being personally responsible? Have you self-reflected to say, well, what is it that I could be doing? And if you have done all of those things and nothing has changed, it's probably time to go. If there's nothing that you can personally do anymore, you're just hitting your head against the wall, right? So I think it depends, and some people are really able to say once they really do the hard stuff, right? Really have the hard conversations, they're able to see some change out of that. So I think that's what you have to ask yourself first.
Yeah, and not to get super philosophical, there's a bigger change, especially with the internet, with Glassdoor and all these companies. Culture is more important. I think there's a huge shift toward, the holacracy. Tony Hsieh at Zappos and Javon Chenard, there was only a handful of strong cult companies before. It was like Disney that you heard, or GE maybe. Now you see a lot more of them, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that accountability is easier than before, which is keeping people honest.
Yep, that is true.
Absolutely.
I would say it just made me think when you're saying cultures that are great, if a book that I would recommend that I would hold up here, I don't have it in front of me, but it's called Creativity Inc., which is about Pixar. Awesome book.
Wait. Ta-da!
Oh, we got the same book library. Here we go. Great book, guys.
Such a great book. It is so readable, and it is seriously one of the best management books I've ever read. Yes, it's talking about a creative culture, but what culture isn't creative at this point? And who doesn't want to have a creative culture? Yeah, maybe you're not all in design and filmmaking. It doesn't matter. Like, there is so much to take from that book. And I just think, big ups on that.
All right. So we're about 12 minutes from the end of the conversation. So I want to start to land the plane here a little bit. So I'd like to ask each of you to offer one recommendation for someone inside of an organization that's scaling. What can they do to contribute, even if they're not leaders? And then we've been doing a lot of promoting of ideas and products. So one additional concept, idea, thing that you'd like to share with everyone on this call. Now, that you've got culture advocates on the call. What resource might you offer them? What do you want to? How can they help? Maybe. Kat, you first. I had to choose somebody.
Thanks for giving me some time.
Let's see. So the first question, I want to make sure I answer them both. So first question is, what can you do no matter kind of what role you're in? How can you get involved? How can you, be a part of what's going on? So I think obviously it differs by company, right? So I think trying to say a specific thing is probably not that helpful because it probably differs. But I think take a good surveillance of the land, right? Really survey what is again, it probably depends on how long you've been there too. Really understand what is the environment you're in. Where are there places? Because there's always places. So what are the places that you're kind of seeing? Is there a way for you to check in with the people that are, doing those groups, or can you talk to somebody who's maybe been there longer if you haven't, so that you can get a little bit of, advice on what's the best place that you could start entering on that. I'd say, really saying it and volunteering is a huge thing. So many people just keep it all to themselves, and people have no idea that they want to do more. Right? It's so common that we forget to actually say out loud what we want in our lives, and that doesn't manifest then. right? So how can you say out loud, even if it's just starting to tell a couple of people, it's amazing the momentum that that has, right? How can you say out loud what it is that you're looking for, or even what you want in the company? So is there a way to start that and build on that, right? I have just found that if you start talking about it out loud, it starts to become something, and you start to see the avenues and the opportunities where you can do that, and use the people that you know are your advocates, where you have them, to say, like, how could I have more of an opportunity to have a voice, or to be a person who's a part of something that is going to create change, depending on what you're looking for. That's my, and really, I think, to go back to personal, because I'm really big on this stuff, is to have your own vision and goals for yourself. Like, that's part of personal responsibility. What is your vision for your life? What are your goals? What's the legacy you want to leave? And so how, like, again, putting that into words and saying it out loud to somebody can mean a lot. And it means that it starts to manifest and become something. So I would say start with that, because that's something anyone can do for themselves. And then what would you say? You said one more tool, or do you want Andrew?
One thing that, well, one idea that what's one thing that you want to promote?
Well, I kind of just said it at the end there.
Okay.
Your own personal legacy. I mean, I really think that's something that anybody could do. And I think that, you know, if you want to have the life that you want to live, you've got to first kind of do 2 steps to that. I think you first have to identify the things that are holding you back, and where you have limiting beliefs or incorrect beliefs about the things that you can and can't do. Because lots of us have them. There's a voice in there. So what are those things? Say them out loud so that you can actually let them go. Then write your vision goal to a place that is actually forward thinking, rather than hold in a place that, like, your teacher or your mom or your boss that you didn't like. If you're writing from that place, you're not writing from a place that you're actually going to do anything that's larger than what you see right now. So I think those 2 steps can really help you to do your own, what you're trying to do, and that creates the rest of it around you.
Great. Andrew?
Yeah, for me, I'm gonna guess at what the kind of who's in the audience right now, and most people are managers or decision makers that they have somewhat a little bit of control in their culture, which is why they're watching a webinar. So if that's the case, I would have them focus on more of the EQ, as kind of Kat is saying, the leadership, the soft skill side of culture, which is communication, empathy, vulnerability. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, if you can't tell. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, shame, guilt, and all that kind of stuff. I just think it starts with kind of like a person, where, because if you hit them over the head with culture too much, people are gonna, not everybody's receptive to that. So for me, the reason I use books is because I leave my books lying around. You can self-select. I have a huge library. Like, I just brought like a portion of it. I have like 4 copies of every book. It's kind of, I have exactly 4 copies of Creativity Inc., 4 copies of Patagonia's book. They're all upstairs in my office. And I have that. I don't give it to people unless they ask for it, but I have them self-select. And I think that's generally how culture is too, because not everybody's receptive to it right away. You can't really beat in culture. So I think a lot of it has to do with EQ. You have to figure out how to read people, how to be vulnerable. So if I'm vulnerable as a leader and I'm working on stuff and they always see the books that I'm reading, my management team is more likely to also be receptive to it too. My team, if you're a manager in your company and you have like a team of 4, and you're not like a director or like super senior, it's okay. How can you still change within your team? And then your team changes, and your team changes everybody under a pyramid. And everybody under a pyramid changes probably a whole division. So I think it's very similar on how I would take it. I think if I were to, what was the second question again? I think I just need to jog my memory.
One thing that you'd like to promote.
Oh, that's right.
One idea, or yeah.
So related to that is, it is a little bit of more Dr. Brene Brown stuff. I'm really into having good dialogue, especially with what's going on in the United States. Some people know I'm part of like with the Obama Commission, and then I'm with the current Trump administration for small business. So I've like, people always, how does a progressive, I'm a progressive, I'm from New York, San Francisco, you can tell. How do you work with the current administration, or how do you not? And I think that mentality is also what you do when you're in a company, because you're going to have people who disagree with you. How do you handle dissenters? How do you handle dissenting opinion? What a lot of people do with culture, they shut it down. And I shouldn't have said exactly like it's zero tolerance, because I think sometimes if they just came from a world where they just didn't know any different, I do think every once in a while, I'm pretty zero tolerance, but the 99.9, the 0.1% there is a time where they just came from a world or a company that they didn't unlearn, as Kat was saying earlier. And I might need to be that person that helps them unlearn, because they have great talent. They have a good core, except they were, I'm not a fan of investment bankers because I was in finance before. Like, you were a former investment banker and you were super Gordon Gekko cutthroat. And it doesn't mean you can't come into Boba Guys. It just means I'm going to really have to, massage it out of you. But the way you do that is through dialogue, is to say, well, why do you think that way? And it takes time, but I really think that's what currently the society really lacks. Like, without getting too much into the politics of everything, it's just like people just shut each other out too quickly. So that's what I would urge.
Great. Well, you guys, thank you very much, Kat, Andrew. Is there some way that folks on this call might get in touch with you on Twitter or the emails or however?
I just put my email out.
Andrew just posted his email. Kat, are you want to be tweeted at?
All
right,
LinkedIn,
perfect.
Certainly, if somebody wants to reach out to LinkedIn there, that's easy.
All right, great.
Yeah. Oops, sorry, wrong. Went out to not the public. Oh, there we go. Everyone.
Fantastic. All right, so it's in your chat window, everyone. We'll also send it out. We're going to thank you. We are going to send out an email following up. There's a request for if each of you share your complete culture stack. So maybe I'll follow up with you guys and see if we can get you to write up kind of what that is. And
I like that their culture stack.
We're going to send up a follow-up email. Okay. Yeah, I know, it's good. Well, I've got my culture code, so I'll sneak that in there too. Please follow at CLxLiveX.com on Twitter. Please visit CLxLiveX.com on the webs, and sign up to be part of our community. And again, we've got events happening quarterly at each of the labs, and we're trying to do more of these kinds of events so that people outside of the lab locations can reach in. Thank you guys so much. This has been amazing. Super interesting, and we'll see you out in the culture world.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Josh.
Bye.
This is great. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Fun. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Kat. And Victoria.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.